Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide you, the listeners and viewers, with a forum in which to ask questions about chess and the chess world. And we ask all kinds of questions, for example, about openings and about strategy and about tournament play and about books and about chess history and whatever comes to mind. The best way to ask these questions is to send an email to me in advance, anytime during the week or even up to today, the day of the show, with and send that email to askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. So the other way you can do this is you can send me a message at my ICC account if you're an ICC member, and that would be John L. Watson, JOHNLWATSON. Okay, and then the last way is to address me live right now. I see there's some people on there. Jonathan, we got games of yours. Sir, we on? Whoops. Okay, I haven't been looking at the chat yet, but I will. Something about Shahada, Mrs. Shahada. Oh, Jennifer. Oh, so you're watching the U.S. Championship, it looks like. Okay, so folks, does everybody know that the U.S. Championship is going on now? And there's some great games going on. Actually, it's very interesting because the players are really, I find it's a really good set of players that we're getting people that are really fighting things out. So a lot of fighting games. And sometimes in international chess these days, you get a little bit too many draws, like this tournament in China recently. As of 27 games, there had been 21 draws, and I noticed the U.S. Championship is a lot more lively and fun. And so, okay, now I'm going to go over a bunch of games because I keep piling them up and having more every week. The games that you guys have sent me, and I think it'd be fun to look through at least a few of those. I think if we can do at least 2 of those a week, that would be a good start towards getting caught up. Serwin and Ashley are excellent but less pretty. Well, okay. Okay, so the only question we have so far is what is the main difference, this is from Alan, what is the main difference between the Tarrasch and the semi-Tarrasch? Is it similar to the Slav and the semi-Slav? And have E3 or E6 been played? Okay, well, in a way that's pretty good, that's a pretty good comparison, because the Slav, if you look at it, that's the Slav. And in the main lines of the Slav, when you don't play a semi-Slav, you take this. Okay, so then you get maybe, for example, things like this can happen. This would be a main line of the Slav. There are other main lines, but this is one of them. So that pawn's been sort of given up in the center. And in the semi-Slav, which is transposed to a semi-Slav, this would be a semi-Slav. These three, this triangle, you maintain that pawn on d5. And white can play either e3 or bishop g5, or maybe some other moves too, like g3, for example. I've played g3 myself, actually. But the real point is black structure. Black does not play d takes c, except, that's badly put. In lines with e3, black simply keeps his pawn on d5. And in lines with bishop g5, actually he does usually accept the gambit, so there you go. It's complicated. There he usually takes that pawn because he thinks he can hold on to it. That's called the Botvinnik variation. After this and this, and a lot of you have seen this already. Okay, so that's the Slav and semi-Slav. The Tarrasch and semi-Tarrasch, in a way, they are sort of similar. It's a similar choice, which is that this is the normal Queen's Gambit declined, and the main line of the Tarrasch goes like this, and white will very often play captures, and play here, and black will play here, and things can open up here. For example, white will play here, and quite soon, for example, white might even take this. There'll be some sort of open lines here in the main lines of the Tarrasch, often. Whereas in the semi-Tarrasch, there's sort of an imitation that goes on. People keep things much closer to the vest. For example, and I'll just give you any old order for the semi-Tarrasch because you can get there various different ways. But it's when white plays this move. So white doesn't get his bishop out there, and he probably doesn't open up a lot of lines, at least to begin with. So things are closer to the vest here. You know, the players can just imitate for a while, for example. That's sort of a common thing to do. And, white at some point might end up taking this, and then black might not even take this way. Black might take this way. But it's sort of a calmer, tighter game where white isn't just trying to throw all his pieces out there and checkmate black or get some sort of immediate advantage. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good analogy, actually. Let's see what else we're going to go here. I have another question or questions. Who has been U.S. champion the most times, and how does that compare with Bobby? That's a good question. I think Bobby Fischer does have the most championships. Walter Brown famously won the U.S. championship 6 times, so that would be second most. I assume Fischer has more U.S. championships than that. To tell you the truth, I'm not a historical expert about the U.S. championships, so I'm not absolutely sure. Frank Marshall was U.S. championship for many years, but they didn't hold it for a long time. So he held it many times. He won it many times, but on the other hand, he just sort of stayed champion for many years in which they didn't have a U.S. championship. So maybe someone else can answer that more exactly. Those would be the 3 people whose names come to mind. Sammy Reshevsky was the best U.S. player, and maybe you could almost argue he's the best U.S. player in history besides Fischer. But I think he didn't hold the U.S. championship that many times. I don't know that for a fact, but I think there were quite a few years where they weren't holding it back then. And so otherwise someone like Reshevsky would have just an enormous number of titles. So yeah, those 3 players come to mind, and not Reuben Fine really. In fact, Reuben Fine didn't win the championship. Reshevsky beat him out for the championship several times. He probably won it at some point once, but I'm not even sure about that. So because he kept getting beat by Reshevsky. Who are some other players that might be? Of course, some of the modern players. I mean, Shabalov's now won it 4 times or something, and Nakamura's won it 4 times, I think. Caruana's now won it 3 or 4 times. Kamsky's won it 3 or 4 times. So we've got some good streaks going with some of the top players here. Okay. Any opponent behaviors that are annoying during your games? Reading novels, music, eating chips, etiquette thoughts. Yeah, eating bothers me, I have to admit, especially if someone's kind of crunching something loudly or there's some sort of chewing motion, candy bars or whatever. I think a little, just drinking a coffee or an orange juice doesn't bother me at all. I think it's just completely normal. If you have something to eat, something solid, it seems to me you can get up from the board and eat it. It's a little bit odd to eat it. This is just me personally. I don't like that at all. It's very annoying. I don't eat myself during the game. I mean, if I eat, I get up to eat. But overall, even eating doesn't bother me that much. I'm fairly open to it. The main thing is don't make a lot of noise, don't crackle a lot of, people who crackle wrappers or candy wrappers or things like that. That's clearly rude, I think. Larry Christensen 3 times, good point. And sort of amazing, not even more. He's such a great player. So yeah, as far as other things with etiquette, I don't really like people who stare at the opponent over the board all the time. I think that's actually just rude. It has nothing to do with the game. It's sort of silly. Elliot used to drive Marta. I bet you did. So I guess that's the other side. You can look at the funny side of it, which is you can be mischievous and use it as an advantage. But yeah, I'm a little sensitive to that. Bananas, yeah. I don't, yeah, that would be a little funny, but at least it doesn't make a lot of crazy noises. I hate the ones that make a lot of noise. The candy bar wrappers are the ones that kill me. Rapid shaking, yeah, there's a thing where people are shaking. Some people basically can't help it very much. Walter Brown shook all the time. Yeah, let me think about other things that sitting over the board and standing above the board and staring at it is sort of unnecessary. If you want to get up and walk around, get up and walk around. Don't sit there standing, hovering over the board or hovering behind your opponent. It's okay to look at the game from behind your opponent to get a different perspective on the game, but you should keep your distance a little bit. Don't just crowd up to your opponent and stare over the board. At least this is how I feel. I feel basically that really anything that's potentially distracting, you probably should avoid just out of basic politeness. Okay. All right. So let me look at some games here. Let me go on to some games that I got sent. We have older games first. because I've held a couple of these for some weeks. So here's a short game. He says, I play this opening a lot and I want your input in on it. This is actually, I hope Jonathan Russell doesn't mind me mentioning it. I believe it's his game. Moving Dutchman versus Bishop Mate. Okay, so there you go. There's a semi-Slav. It's a Queen's Gambit, but right now it's a semi-Slav. And white plays the most aggressive move, Bishop G5. And now that's unusual. That's an unusual move for black. Normally, black will, actually at this point, in this exact order, usually black will grab that pawn now. Because that's the disadvantage of what white's done, is he can no longer win that pawn back by force, because black's going to play b5 effectively. And then we get, as I say, some incredibly heavily theoretical variations involving, what am I doing? For example, the Botvinnik variation goes like this. Now you can just decline it or you can take it. Black doesn't have to play this way either, but this is a very famous line. This white gets his piece back because of the pin, and this goes on and on and on. So that would be sort of more critical. You need to study a lot to play lines like that. Usually your opponent knows them very, very well. The second most popular move, I think, would probably be here, because it keeps more flexibility as to where you want that bishop. You might want that bishop here. And this is your basic semi-Slav position or formation, is like this. The only problem is against bishop g5, it's pretty good for white to play this way. But at least that's your normal thing if white plays slowly. For example, if white plays here, black just plays like that, and white makes a move or something, and then black can take that. Let's say white made another slower move, just so we can get, in principle, where black wants to put his pieces. Black tends to put his pieces there, and then castle and play for e5. So that's kind of the general idea. But against bishop g5, sort of all bets are off, and usually what black does is capture that pawn. Bishop e7 is just a little slow, because you might want the bishop on a more active square. So white does the right thing here, and black attacks the bishop, which probably doesn't hurt. Now, one thing to notice here is a lot of times you chase this bishop because you want to chase it down and win it, but you really can't do that here, because this kind of thing, the knight's just all misplaced, and black isn't well enough developed to support this kind of thing. White could even play bishop takes b8. More likely, he can just play here. And, you know, if the knight goes back, you haven't chased it, you've just lost more time. If you play this move, that looks tempting, but then white has any number of moves, so this would be a nice move, threatening check, and then you certainly don't want this position for white. That would be pretty awful. You've lost the e5 square, the king's stuck. It's very easy to get mated in a position like this. But on the other hand, if the knight retreats, or something like this or something, then you probably give him a check, and then you bring your bishop back to g3 next, and black didn't even get rid of just to show you that you can't always chase down that bishop. It always bears looking at. And there's other ways to play a position like this too. For example, knight back here, or maybe even knight h4, because that has this idea, and queen takes check. So that's just a quick aside for those of you that haven't played these things a lot, because you may have noticed that one of the ideas of playing h6 is often to play g5, knight out, and get the bishop pair by getting rid of that bishop. And I'm just saying you can't do that here. It's probably worth noting that. So instead, black just brings his knight out, knight bd7, and white plays a3. Now that to me makes no sense, because white's whole advantage here is that he's ahead in development and space, and so he wants to do something more aggressive. Maybe a move like rook c1 would be an idea, or a move like let me see. Sorry, I'm just getting some things out of the way here. Queen c2 would be a logical move. Bishop d3 is very logical, because it's true that black can gain time taking it, but that surrenders the center, and white would have what I just consider these positions better for white, just because he has space and more to do. So rook c1, queen c2. So a3 is very slow, and black stops b4, but he doesn't really have to. The b4 is not really a threat. I mean, after castles b4, white could, for example, play this move. Black could. And now white's goofed around too much. He's made too many slow moves. So black's not only castled, white's 2 moves away from castling still. So white's gone from having maybe a slight lead in development, and a little more space, a little more harmonious development, to actually being behind in development a little bit. And this kind of position is very easy to play. If white plays here, black can attack the center like this. And I'd rather be black than white in a position like this, because white's wasted a lot of time with these pawns, and black's counterattacking in the center. If white plays, what else could white do? I don't know, white can play here. That's not a bad move, but then black is able to free it. Because there's no more pressure here, then black can free his game with that kind of a move. Attacking the bishop, and you'll find that these positions are very easy to play for black. Should be. Famous last words. Probably e5 here, but I'm not totally sure. You could play f5 and then e5. Probably e5 though. Should be good. Just because white hasn't castled at all, so it almost had, you know, he really, it's too early to be attacking black's center. And black just got his last piece free too by playing e5. Okay, so what's that all about? I don't even know what that's all about. Oh yeah, that I think a3 is too slow and you could just castle against it. Instead you stop the move b4, and that's fine too. And now white developed, black castled, white played here. There's a tendency at some point here for this to become a pretty good move, just because you have more space, and you have a, because if black plays something like this, you can even retreat here and just have a nice central majority and keep his pieces a little bit cramped. Or you could take also with an advantage. Either way, white would have some advantage. So black usually takes back that way, and then white can just castle. And it's just a little simpler for white to play this position. It's a little easier for white to play this position. Very similar to a mainline Queen's Gambit, but I would say better for white than most of those positions. So let's see what actually happened. White played there, and black took, and that's very logical. I think he could also conceivably play here and start counterattacking in the center, but white's probably a little better no matter what here, but not much, not enough to really count. Then black makes an odd move. I mean, it's a decent move, but it subjects him to sort of an advance in the center, so it makes me wonder if that's really best. I think maybe just trying to attack that way is best, and then just put your bishop here and aim for moves like b4 and c5. It's normally what you do. This is turned into a sort of kind of a Slav defense, like a Moran variation in terms of its themes. Instead he plays there, and that just means white's going to have a central advantage. In fact, that move I showed you earlier I like here, because you get an attack. It keeps the bishop on a beautiful diagonal. It keeps more pieces on the board. Now you're ready to play e4, or castles in e4. Instead he played takes, nothing wrong with that. And then now once again e4 makes sense, but maybe the timing's funny. Probably the best thing to do now is to castle actually, and keep e4 in the background, because after all black isn't playing e5 anyway, because this knight is hanging, and if black takes, then there's two ways to play. One is here, preventing e5, and the other one is even here, because even though black can free his game with e5, white's got a little more space, and he's got a 2-to-1 central majority, and probably can boast of some advantage here, probably just some simple move, rook b1, or maybe a4 and rook b1 next, something like that. So I don't really like black's knight there too much, but he plays e4 right away, and that has a little problem, which is that this knight f4 move attacks here, and also it's just hard to get rid of that knight without making some sort of concession. Now having said that, I think white should just probably try to get rid of that. But then black's got this cute little move b5, and I was looking at this, and I think white is almost, I think white's still maybe a little better, but it's hard to figure out what to do with this bishop. You know, if you bring the bishop this way, then probably the knight can sink in here. But if you bring the bishop this way, then the knight comes back and white's not all that well developed. You know, white might have some advantage here, but he's not castled yet, so probably black's doing reasonably well. He's also got a little bit of pressure on that diagonal. So this knight f4 move was very nice actually for black. And white just castled, very natural. But that allows black to free his game, and I think now black's probably okay, just because that's a nice piece, especially against a castled king. It's an awkward piece to get rid of. And white does a good thing here. White tries to get rid of that piece soon. It might have been even the next move. Oh, here we go. So remember we talked about which rook to put where. The computer prefers putting this rook here so that this rook can go to the open file. But I'm not that convinced, because it takes you away from kingside defense anyway, so who knows. I mean, there's a lot of ways to play this. You know, these rook problems are hard to solve. But that's certainly a pretty natural move. It protects this and works along the file. And black plays up. Now that has some ideas maybe of some point about the idea that a knight here is going to be also on this knight here. I mean, for example, if white went here now, I imagine that that would be pretty loosening. Might be playable. It's a little scary. I guess this check doesn't do much. Okay, so that wouldn't be much. You'd have to take here first. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on there. But so queen f6. I don't know if queen f6 is the best move. Probably not. One thing you could do is just take this. And because these knights are sitting on squares like that, and the bishop is nice and open against the king, you're probably totally okay here. You know, you got to be careful. If white plays knight takes, you could be a little careful about moves like that. They can cause some problems. You know, something like this. That kind of position is awkward. Probably black's just better here, just because it's hard to get rid of all of, you know, bishop h3 is coming. These squares are hanging. It's just a little bit difficult. Okay, so let's go back here for a second. See about the chat here, by the way. Okay, Elliot's saying some stuff. Meyer, you out of touch h6. Well, of course you can play h6. I'm not trying to give a full theory of a position here. My goodness, my goodness. I'm going to have to be more accurate here. Okay, so what else we got here? We've got, okay, the queen f6 move. I'm not too thrilled with that. And white makes a good move. You know, this is an annoying piece. About time to get rid of it. Now, that doesn't mean white's better, but at least it gets rid of these attacking ideas, which are, after all, a little bit scary. There's some, it's not easy to sort of handle these things. Okay, so he takes, it's probably more natural to take this way, I think. But I'm not going to worry about it too much because we've got other games to get to also. So let's just see what happens. It's all pretty natural so far. That's a nice move. It frees the bishop and puts the knight in a nice square where it attacks a couple of pieces. So probably white's going to take that. Is that what you did? Yes. And then black took here. Maybe queen takes is a little more accurate. Okay, now this one's hanging, and so white simply played rook over. And this is a pretty important position. If anybody's better, probably white is. He's got this mobile majority idea. He's control of his d-file is the main thing he has. And but black stands very solidly, and there's really not much reason he should be much worse here. He played this move. I don't think that's a bad move, but another way you could play it is just go ahead and get some space on this side of the board. And then a nice little move here is just to protect some of this, to protect the second rank with that move. I think that's a good move. It's kind of a funny move. It comes in handy in a lot of positions, but the only reason I say that is because I took a look at this game right before we started this show, and I think that's just a good way to play it. That's not bad, but then after this move, I think black makes his only real mistake so far. I mean, a serious mistake. This is still better for white. You know, you have a little bit of space in the center. You have some attacking chances. I think it's totally defensible for black. No huge problems. But this, and I think this is kind of instructive, the move made is not very good because, for one thing, it lets white take over the 7th rank without being able to get rid of that rook. But almost more importantly, once it gets to the 7th rank, it has more scope. So in other words, a position like this, if you go to the 7th rank, actually, I don't know exactly what. Well, white's better here. There's no question white's better here, come to think of it. It's possible you could counterattack this way on that guy. I'm not sure. And then play rook e7 if he doesn't take the b pawn. The other thing you could do is just play slowly. But the point I wanted to make, though, is with the pawn here, the rook also has attacking scope in that direction. With the queen there, there are fewer weaknesses, and the rook's more limited. White's position, this doesn't scare me too much. Maybe white's better, but it's not as bad as after this. And this position's very difficult now. How do you challenge that rook? There's moves like queen here all of a sudden threaten something, or have attacking scope where it didn't with the pawn still on f7. So black defends the b pawn, very natural move. Now white, I think, should just go ahead and play here and get rid of the queen and attack. And I think that's quite effective, actually. I think white's got quite an advantage here. Plays slowly, no problem with that. There's always the clock to consider. Black checks, and that's a good move. This is a great example of where you're almost sure to win an ending with a rook on the 7th rank if he takes those queens off, and that's what white recognized here, and I think that's really cool. That means that you're not scared of just taking the queens off, and you're trusting your endgame ability. One rook on the 7th that's able to, you know, you're able to double on the 7th here pretty soon unless black does something, and you've got very good winning chances here. So I think queen f2 is a good move. It's a nice move. Okay, so black avoided the exchange of queens, and then that allowed white to come in and attack this pawn. Black played rook f7. I'm not sure, and that gives white another rook that can go to the 7th rank. And he played there first. That's very clever. That's a nice move because the whole idea was, well, look what happened in the game. In the game, black took, probably time pressure, black took and resigned at the same time because white has this move. So black didn't even wait to resign. Obviously, if black takes this, white has a win of the queen. On the other hand, what black could do, I think here white probably is best off just playing check, by the way, because even though f4 is very tricky, it does allow this counterattack. And maybe this is not quite the position. White's still much better, but this is probably not quite the position that white wants. It's not quite as decisive. Maybe now just h3, and white's better, but it's not as easy as the other position, I think, where if you checked first. All right, so that was that game. It's a great game. It's a good game. It's well played, and I think it's worth looking at. It's worth seeing. In the opening, as I say, the thing is black usually plays more actively if he plays this semi-Slav structure, and white also doesn't waste a lot of time with a3s and moves like that. And after the opening, in fact, we can real just quick zoom through that. So everything was normal. Black's playing kind of slowly with the move bishop e7. And a3 is very slow, and a5 is unnecessary, actually. So now we're back to a fairly normal position, and that move kind of gives the center up a little bit. So after that, white was better, but black played well enough to fight back and get a decent game, and then things just blew up. Okay, good enough. That's that game. Let's see what we got on the chat here. French defense, knight c3. Lines other than knight f6 or bishop b4 are offbeat, but are there playable lines where you can get out of the book and have good play? Okay, let's take a look at that. Let me put up the next game I'm going to show first, and we'll use that as a thing. Okay, EX. Okay. There we go. Okay, now let's just look at the question. The question is French defense. A lot of French defense players out there. And we have after this, okay, other than the main moves, okay, what he's saying is here's one of the main moves for those of you who don't know. That's called the winnower variation. It attacks this pawn by pinning this knight. This also attacks this pawn, very logical, by attacking twice. And those are really the two main lines in the French. Now, what else is there? This is called the Marshall variation, and it's probably not as bad as its reputation, but it's not very good. And the main reason it's not very good is because these isolated pawn positions, probably bishop b5 check first, actually. These isolated pawn positions with the knight here already attacking that pawn are hard for black to defend. It's the way to look at it. So c5 is not considered a really legitimate answer. Bishop e7 is perfectly playable. I think we already saw a game with this on this show. It's quite a reasonable move. It's been played quite a bit. One of the ideas of bishop e7 is that after you do play knight f6, let's say white plays knight f3, and after you do play knight f6 and he attacks, you can actually bring the knight this way. And some people think that has some advantages. Now, of course, white doesn't have to play that way, and he may want to play that way. So it's not as though this is this fantastic line for black, but it is playable. Nigel Davies has a DVD about it, about how to play it, if you want to pick up a little hints about how to play this. I looked at some games recently with this. For my chess publishing column in the French, I realized that this is still a viable line. And you know, this exchange variation is not that thrilling for white because the knight's not really that well placed. Sure, the bishop is neither, but nothing special for white. There's no real refutation here. You can play this kind of move trying to get the queen over here and attack this, but you know, when black has that kind of counterattack here and it can't be supported by c3, and I'm not saying you play that immediately, but you might, usually that means black has quite a bit of play. So there's nothing obviously wrong with bishop e7. A move that I've paid a lot of attention to over the years and played myself is this move. I call this the Hecht Riefschläger because Grandmaster Hecht played the most wonderful, Grandmaster Riefschläger played the most wonderful games with it for years, some in correspondence chess, and Grandmaster Hecht, who's more famous and was the one of the top players in Germany for many years, played this line too. So I call it the Hecht Riefschläger variation. In chess publishing, which is a service that unfortunately you have to pay for, and you can look it up, just Google chess publishing, has more theory on this variation than any other source by a landslide, because both Neil MacDonald, who was the writer for the French column before I was, and I have put in countless games with countless notes on this variation. So you might want to look into this. I think this is a fun line. White has all kinds of things he can do. The most obvious thing he can do is there, but then the idea is that once again, you have this move, which you don't normally have, because if he takes it, then you're losing the d pawn after the knight moves. So he can't take it, so he has to do something else. And then, for example, you have moves like, well, you can bring the knight out, you can move the bishop out and pin him. That's the most normal move, actually. And this is fun, interesting stuff, considered pretty good. A lot of people play this move, which is what Fischer played against Petrosian, but it's considered completely harmless now. And that's another variation you have to at least study, but nobody thinks it's really that good for white at this point. White can also play slowly and carefully with that move, after which black can strongly consider going there, because if the bishop moves again, you can win this. I think it's probably the best move, actually. On the other hand, white's ahead in development and has a little bit, and black's bishop is bad, so it's not you might get the bishop pair, but you have a lack of space, so it's a trade-off. It's a fun line. It's something to look at. I won't go any further than that. Maybe if you send me a specific question by email about a particular line in the Hecht Riefschläger, I can give you a lot of details and we can have some fun with it, or send me a game. So try that out. Try out knight c6 and see what you think. Without a6 and a4, this was the thing I was showing earlier, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I should, Elliot, I should be watching more in time as I show things to see your comments, because you make good comments. Usually I kind of tend to look after I show the game to look at the comments, but I'll try to, if I'm in the middle of a game, I'll peek over more often at the chat. Okay. The knight d2 seems to allow more playable options in the French. Yes, that's true. Knight d2 offers just a ton of playable options. And the reason for that we've talked about before, which is that white, in a sense, is playing a move that he's not quite sure what his next move is. It's sort of an odd move. It blocks off your own piece, and it sort of asks black to do something. And black's two main moves gives you very obvious, simple, direct things to do. Attack the knight, or either develop immediately or isolate the pawn at some point. Play some move that you get this move in soon and isolate the pawn. So c5 and knight f6, which are black's main moves against knight d2, give white something to do. But the reason there's so many good moves for black, or interesting moves for black, that aren't c5 or knight f6 is because white has no real special plan here. So black can play this move. We've talked about all these moves in this show. This move I've played quite a lot, actually. This move is very popular. It's one of the most popular lines, actually. And the reason you can make all these slow moves is because knight d2 is a funny move itself. It sort of blocks off white's own pieces. It doesn't leave white with an obvious plan. Because the minute white plays, just for example, let's say you do play a move like this or something, and white play, or even bishop e7, and white plays this move, one big difference now is that white's favorite setup is putting this knight here, and it can't go there anymore. And if it goes here, it tends to be badly placed on that side of the board, or at least not really well placed. So yeah, so good point. So it is true that the Tarrasch gives black all kinds of playable options. In fact, I haven't even finished. Well, there's the Gamard too, which is a standard sort of move. And once again, it's because the knight's on d2 that you got an extra tempo attacking here, and you might even be able to play e5 too. Okay. Good point about rook fd1, Elliot. Yeah, I didn't mention it at the time because we don't want to take too long in each game, but remember when I talked about making that choice between two rook moves, one of the ideas was of what white actually did with putting the rook over there was that f4 was still possible, so the rook could stay on f1, and that's a typical consideration. I don't think that made either move better than the other one, but it shows that those rook decisions about which rook to put where are often they're just trade-offs, and they're almost dead even trade-offs. So if you spend too long, remember the other day people asked me about the wrong rook problem, and I was saying what I've done and what I think every top player has done, and I'm not a top player, but what I've done over the years is I've spent too long trying to make those decisions. Very, very often, especially in the queen pawn openings, you'll find that they're pretty much equivalent. So don't get in time trouble thinking about which rook to put on which file. It's nice to think about it a little bit. It's good to try and make the right move, but often you'll find that there are trade-offs and they're fairly even. Okay, I was thinking bishop e7, but after e5 seems more annoying than after knight f6. Well, that's true. Let's take a look at that. He's saying after bishop e7, which is the third most popular move, by the way, probably, a little worried about e5, which is Adam's favorite move. Now, what I've found is that the top grandmasters don't play e5 that much, except for Adams, and even he plays other moves a lot. He doesn't just play e5. Um, and I think that's because, you know, this is the pawn structure black wants. Black wants to be able to attack that center, you know, to make these moves. And so the fact that it's a little bit awkward because of this move queen g4 is made up for by the fact that black's attacking. Now, for example, this is the main line, and now black can play either king here or pawn here, or as in my last chess publishing column, someone even just played that move, because the queen's kind of exposed out here, and the center is under a lot of pressure. I think, you know, this kind of thing. And black got equality doing that. I think black can also get complete equality just playing king here, because for one thing, black can gain some time attacking this queen. For example, if white plays slowly and just tries to protect that, then sometimes black will almost very, very early on play h5 and g5 kind of moves. For example, here. And if white plays here, just keep attacking. Play moves like that. And then if white plays here, maybe you can play knight here because you've got ideas of these kinds of ideas. Theory says it's all about equal. Another move you can make is one I recommended in all of my early Play the French books, or some of them, which is to play this immediately. I'm not sure if it's as good, but it's an interesting move. It just stops queen g4. It stops that from being a problem. And so, but on the other hand, it puts a knight on a funny square. So you have to, it's a trade-off. And white can go here, for example, attacking that knight. And if you don't want him to take it, then you have to put the knight there. And maybe you don't get this attack going as early as you want to. Maybe you have to worry about moves like this. I think black's okay here. It's a little bit obscure, but if you don't want to memorize a whole bunch of lines with queen g4, you can stop it right away and have a perfectly decent game. So I hope that's an answer to that. Did you touch on anything new, interesting in the Anti-Grunfeld or the Nimzo? Wow. The F3 Nimzo. Sorry about the centimeter. I see. Is h6 after knight c doesn't work, does it? Yes, it does, and it's played, actually. Let me show you what the reasoning behind h6 is. After knight c3, I don't think it's as good a move. I think it's a better move after knight d2, but it's an interesting move. And basically what it's saying is that I'm going to play knight f6, but I don't want you to play bishop g5, basically. And there's another sort of weird little subtle point. Take a look at this position, for example, here. This is pretty good for white because he can play, for example, here. It's been played for black, but it's pretty good for white because that pawn's just sort of loose there, and white can just protect his center and castle, and then this pawn is kind of weak. Now look at the difference here, and that's why you'll see black will almost never play knight e4. It's not a very common move at all anymore. There have been articles about it, but very unconvincing. Okay, but if you play this, let's say white plays here now and you play here, and now white attacks. Well, now you go here, it's a whole different story, because after taking, what white would like to do in order to counterattack is to put his knight back here and attack that square, but he can't do it because of h6. So h6 has this funny anti-knight g5, anti-bishop g5 function, but also anti-knight g5 function. And obviously if the knight goes here, you're going to take this pawn. And if the knight goes back to g1, well, that's a little bit depressing. Black's going to start counterattacking in the center. I assume with c5, he might play knight c6, probably c5. And already you're having trouble defending that center. I suspect black's just better here. Yeah, he really is, because even if you ever get knight e2 in, you're blocking your bishop, and if you get bishop e3 in, you're allowing bishop e4 check. That's assuming some variation like this, by the way. Oh, wait, look at this. You can't even play there because of check. And we're taking that one. Is that true? Yeah. So, well, obviously white wouldn't take. I'm not saying that's a good move, but I'm saying that would allow you to put that knight there, which is kind of fun, because now you have bishop e4 as an idea. You might have f5 as an idea. You certainly have c5 as an idea, regardless. So that explains h6 to some extent. Now, of course, white can just play here. And then again, though, you can play here and put more pressure on that square. And white has to decide what to do with that pawn. And the minute he plays here, he's freed your bishop, and it's very unlikely that you're going to stand better as white. But what else can he do? Well, you know, this move is going to lose the bishop. You don't want to do that. So already, you know, you're sort of aiming towards that kind of position probably, and then black might be happy. Okay, so that's after knight f3, and you might say, well, knight f3 was a bad move then. But on the other hand, what are you going to do? Black's going to probably going to play either c5 or knight f6 anyway. Probably knight f6 next. And what are you going to do to anticipate that move, knight f6? Well, if you start playing moves like what are some of the options here? I should know what the options here are. I don't play the h6 line myself here, so I'm trying to think. If you play a move like bishop d3, there's always a bit of an issue that c5 becomes a stronger move. because the bishop really should be on some other square after c5. Now, whether you would play it immediately, I don't know. It's really a good question. You might want to just play this right away, actually. Another thing you could do after bishop d3 is play here, attacking this, and then if the knight, no matter where the knight, no matter what, how you defend that pawn, there's going to be a knight b4 move. And that could cause some issues, maybe, although I'm not quite sure why. That doesn't look so bad for white, does it? Okay, let me go back. Would there be any reason that this would be undesirable? I guess I would say no. So I don't think knight c6 is a particularly good move. I take that back. c5 is a natural move. Bishop b4 is not a bad move. You can always play bishop b4. I think c5 is the main move. If you go here, now he goes there. And you can play this as black, but I'm not thrilled with it. I don't know. I don't like positions like this that much. So my guess is c5 would be the main move. Okay. Anyway, I hope that answers that question. Now let me see, what else do we have? We have, that's chess philosopher, Colin Crack. Okay, anything new in the Anti-Grunfeld or the f3 Nimzo? Gee, I don't know about anything new. I did see an f3 Nimzo the other day. White is not playing them as much anymore, that's for sure. It's just not, somehow not being as active. Now, what did I see? Oh, something I think is very interesting. No one ever plays this way, but is this move. Just trying to get a big lead in development. I think it's kind of an interesting move. And one idea is that you're going to double these pawns and play some sort of very solid structure like that. And a move like this is actually just kind of asking for it. It's very, very overextending the center, and that pawn's hanging for one thing. And after a move like this, things are very loose here. This is probably not something you want. I don't think we play knight h5 yet. We probably just play something like this and then crack open this file. I think white's a little overextended here. This is not what white wants. So that's an idea against the f3 Nimzo. What have I seen recently? Well, these main lines are being played again still. This idea of playing like this and then playing for the b5 move. I don't know if you've seen that. I saw a couple games with this recently. I think they play b5 right now, if I'm not mistaken. That's a move that's been played a little bit. Or maybe taking first. No, well, you could take first, but you wouldn't play b5 then. That's certainly a completely solid line just to go like this. There's no real problems here. F3s could be fun for white. You better know it really well, though, because you're behind in development. And once you're behind in development, you want to be very concrete. If you know what you're doing, you should be able to get a decent game. You've got space. And you shouldn't stand worse, I don't think. But it's lost some of its surprise value. The Anti-Grunfeld, wow. I guess you mean this one. There's a lot of Anti-Grunfelds, but I think you mean the English version of the Grunfeld, which would be this kind of thing. Like that, right? I assume you mean one of these, probably. This has become fairly popular, this kind of idea. Yeah, I don't know about new ideas. White plays b3 too a lot. Another Anti-Grunfeld is to play this first, and then play a really early e3. But I mean, basically, is he really going to play the Grunfeld if you play e3 now? If he does, though, one of the ideas is to play b3 in these positions. To play queen c2 and b3 and moves like that. Afraid I'm not going to be much help here. It'd have to be a little more specific. Send me a specific question about specific lines in the Anti-Grunfeld, and I will prepare an answer and take a look at it. What's your opinion of the line? Okay, we won't do another game yet. We'll look at some actual analysis here. That'll be fun. The line b6 in the French. Okay, let's look at that. Get in my French. Back to our French lovers questions. We haven't been doing that for a couple weeks. Bishop b4, e5, knight e7. Oh yeah, so he's going to play knight e7. Now you'd have to know these lines. You have to realize that he can play bishop d2 here. But then you can always transpose if you need to. You can play this line. So that's not bad. What else are we looking at? We're looking at a3. Okay. Yeah, this has a long and storied history. Now there's two moves here. You can play queen. Well, actually that's not true. In this position, you probably would play b6 right away. Okay, that's good enough. If you're going to play b6 at all, you want to play it right away. Okay. And okay, so queen g4 is one of the main moves now. And what else does white have before I get to that? I think what else white can do. Black's idea is to win the light squares. For example, something like this. Maybe white takes that so he can still castle. And then black's idea is that white's left with his bad bishop, and black has pressure on the queen side. White's idea is that he has more space. Mostly people are pretty happy with black here. I don't think anybody's too worried about black here. Even if white tries to play, let's say white attacks that or something, which is what he usually does somewhere. Whose move is it? Sorry, okay, so let's say it's black's move. Even if white attacks this, you can always just come back again, and then, for example, come up again and put your knight here, and then try to put your knight there. That's one of the theories of how black wants to put his pieces on this line. And he might play for c5 later. Probably not too early. So queen g4 is critical. That's the move that kind of discouraged, bishop a6 for some time. Black usually plays knight g6 here. It's an odd move. The problem is that if he plays knight f5, he runs into bishop d3. And unlike other knight f5 lines, you can't play this move queen h4, which is a common answer to, in this kind of position because you lose a piece. See, your queen's attacked, so you don't have time to take back. So that's why black tends to play knight g6 here. Now, why doesn't he castle? Well, if he castles, you always have this problem with bishop h6 moves. So white starts with, for example, this move. I hope I get this right. Threatening bishop h6, which will win the exchange because there'll be no way to defend against mate except g6. And so generally, so in other words, if black tries to play his normal idea of getting rid of that piece, it's too late because white can play bishop h6. That's not actually true. White actually plays bishop g5 here, I think. No, he plays this and then he plays bishop g5. You have to know, you have to kind of look at a little bit of the theory here, but it turns out this is a little bit awkward because white's got a very quick h4, h5 coming. Boy, I have to revive all my thinking about this. At any rate, by sort of elimination, black ends up playing that move. And then white has a bunch of ideas, and one of the main ones, the one I was thinking, one of the main ones is to play here with the idea of going here, and if black plays here, which he usually does, you just go straight back, and you're thinking about bishop g5 and trying to loosen up that king side. So in fact, this is one of the main lines, something like this, bishop g5, queen d7 with the idea of playing here. And if you go back and you look at, like, Ifkov used to play this, I think this is a game, Burn Ifkov or something. White was thought to be somewhat better in this position years ago, and in a way nobody ever changed their mind about that. That's still true. If you play really accurately, white is still considered to be better in this position. So I guess my opinion is that white probably still has a small advantage, but it's definitely playable, and it can also be a lot of fun. Okay, then there was a question with 3f3. Okay. Yeah, that can transpose into the Samish variation. Yeah, let's take a look at that. So you're talking about playing this move in order to work against the Grunfeld defense. And the reason that works against the Grunfeld defense is because now you have a unique position for white, where white's trying to win the center. And players seem to be perfectly willing to play this as black. I saw that. There was a very recent game with this. And of course, people like Svidler have played this as black quite a bit. So most people do think that black's still okay here, is my impression. But white also can like playing this variation. After all, you do have the center, right? So let me just make a point about this, though, first. And I'm sure you know this already, but not everybody's going to know this. If black simply goes here and then goes here, he's simply got a King's Indian Samish. So white has to be ready to play the King's Indian Samish variation, which, you know, there's many systems that black can play in the King's Indian Samish, so you have to know what you're doing as white if you're going to play f3. That doesn't mean you can't play d5 here for black, of course. And again, both sides have to know this position, because if white gets a few extra moves, you know, he's just going to set up with a big center and have just the better game. He can even play f4 in some positions, it turns out. So there have been a lot of games with this in the last maybe 5 years especially. So Yasser Serouin used to play this as white years ago. He'd play an early f4 in some of these positions. It's always been considered that black can hold this, but it's an interesting, decent way to play it. I think Nakamura has played white, for example. There have been a lot of top-level games with this. And the last game I saw between high players, white actually won. So apparently, you know, at least white still thinks there's a chance to play for an advantage in this position. You know, this is basically, okay, I'm going to mess this up because I'm not going to be good at showing how this for sure goes. I think he castles first. And white can play queen d2, white can play f4, that's played sometimes. And I'm trying to remember what else white plays here. I think that's probably it. There are lines where white's playing like queen b3, but not here, I don't think. Sorry about this. I just don't know this line anymore. I can't remember what the main line is. There's this line where black plays queen d6. I remember that was solving quite a few of his problems. And then black was going queenside. But how that happened, I have no idea. I can't remember anymore. Yeah, just not going to be able to remember this exactly, how this works. Okay, what else do we have here? Do you have an opinion on c4, c5, knight f3, g6 against the English? Let's take a look at that. c4, c5, knight f3, g6 immediately? Okay. Oh, do I have an opinion on this? Well, one thing is that white can get into a Maroczy bind by force here, right? If black takes this, which I assume you're doing. So this is one of those cases where you can't really stop e4 from happening, if I remember right. Is that correct? Oh, no, that's not correct at all. My fault. Boy, I'm not sharp today, sorry. Yeah, if bishop g7, you can play here, but I guess you're not forced into that, are you? What can black play to avoid the Maroczy bind? Well, maybe there is no easy way to avoid it. So, okay, so for one thing, you have to know the Sicilian defense. You have to know this variation. You have to know the accelerated fianchetto, I think. And you can correct me if you're wrong, by the way. Just put it in the chat. But if you play an accelerated fianchetto like this, you do have to face that position. That's the Maroczy bind, right? And a lot of people don't like facing that. But on the other hand, some people don't mind at all. So that's the first thing I would say about G6 immediately, is you've got to watch out for transpositions. Okay, so we were doing this, this. Now, what else does black have to think about with this? If white plays moves like this, you're just getting into sort of your standard position where black can stop d4, and then white has all kinds of, both sides have all kinds of setups. In this position, you have a setup with e5, the Botvinnik system. You have a sort of Fischer, what Fischer played, the e6 system with this, followed by d5 if you can get it in. Very popular. Those two are probably the most popular lines. You can also play very flexibly like that and wait a little bit. Sometimes the knight even comes here. This is a very famous line, really the main line of the symmetrical English. So white may not want to do that. What else can what are some white's options? If white plays this way and plays here now you don't get a Maroczy bind because black plays here and there's no time to get e4 in because this is attacked. Now white can play this way. For example, white can play that move. It's sort of interesting. And then black can take and play knight f6, and you can't really stop the move d5 now with pretty decent play for black. That's a famous line. You can also play, and you can play here, but that's very slow, isn't it? Black just plays very normally now and gets pretty easy equality. So let me see, what else do we need to talk about with G6 move order? Okay, so the final move order would be just going here with the idea of going here, and that's actually been pretty popular. And it's most popular, this variation, if black has knight c6 already in, because after d4, he can't stop d5. And that line's long been considered slightly better for black. Sometimes black will play it anyway, just play this move, but not normally. On the other hand, if you haven't played knight c6 yet, you can play this move. And then after here, you can take it, usually, and play this move. That's the idea. And you get a Tarrasch reverse. This is a normal Tarrasch Queen's Gambit where white has one extra move. White's playing the Tarrasch Queen's Gambit declined. He's playing the black side with one extra move. And most people think this is okay for black. I think we've even talked about this position a little bit. It's also a Caro-Kann Panov kind of position. I think we've even talked about this a little bit in this show already. What else do I need to know about that? Do you have a specific question? The best way to do this is which line with the G6 bothers you? I assume you want to play this for black. Or what can you do as white? Is there a specific line after G6 that interests you here, I guess, would be the question. But that's about all I know about it offhand, just directly offhand, is that you do have to allow the Maroczy bind. Same thing here. You still have to allow d4 next move with the Maroczy bind. And if you don't get a Maroczy bind, those are some of the options, some of these E3 lines like this. For example, if he plays there right away, sometimes black will play here right away, anticipating this position. Okay, and black's considered okay in these positions, but so is white. White can play these lines too. Great question. Okay, then what else do we have here? We have, let's do another game. Let's do another game. Let's do the game we have right in front of us here. This is from David Brown, who Yeah, let me just see here. Is that the right game? Yeah, this is David Brown who sent me this, and he says about this, I had to face the Catalan for the first time. I fluked some decent moves in a row, which is true. You responded very well, and then I think I slipped a bit. So I fell off, and then finally I was under pressure for ages, and I fell off the face of the earth by blundering, which happens to all of us. I guess my question is, what should I be looking for in the Catalan Open to avoid the fracturing of my pawns, and what should I be looking for if I do get a fractured position? So let's look at this. So he'd never played against the Catalan before. He really responded very logically and well. Okay, he took this. Now, just for the record, there's two ways of playing the Catalan. One is where you don't take on c4 or you delay taking. You can even play a really slow move like c6. There are people who play these. That's called a closed Catalan. The minute black takes, that's called an open Catalan. And there's a bunch of different answers to that. Recently there was another game, black won another of these Super Grandmaster games with this old gambit position. Where you allow white to take twice there, and you get open lines. And it's a really fascinating line. It's been around for, God knows, 80 years, and all the top grandmasters have played with this position forever, and they still haven't decided who's winning and who's losing in this position. So that's a lot of fun. So that's one of the open Catalan lines. The more common ones are like this, where black plays like this, and you've probably all seen this kind of thing before. This is a typical grandmaster opening. So what else was I going to say about this line? Anything in particular? Oh yeah, that there's something really interesting here. If you want to get something like what you got in the game, what you got was a position where you got doubled pawns on the c-file. Well, an interesting version that's been played recently a lot is black plays this move rather than knight c6. And then if knight comes here, he plays the bishop here, giving up the bishop pair, but it's a little complicated because if he starts taking the bishop pair, he gets stuck trying to defend that. And black can break in the center too. Black's got plenty of active pieces to play here. And if white tries to double these pawns, which is similar to the kind of question you were asking, how do I deal with these fractured pawns? Turns out this one's very good for black. It might even be better for black because he has this nice little move. And now black has a bunch of light square control, but he also has this nice combination of this file, maybe this file, depending on what white does. And he's got much better development. These pieces are still undeveloped, whereas black's pieces are out and active. And if white takes that, you undouble your pawns, and you're still ahead in development, and you still have the b file, and you have a move with c5, and you actually stand better already. So this line with bishop d7, white doesn't usually play knight e5. I mean, he does sometimes for other reasons, but usually white will just take this, and then you go here. And this has turned into a very reliable anti-Catalan system if you want to play one. This is one that's very good. But you do have to learn these lines where he plays knight e5 first. So you have to look at these lines. You have to decide what you want to do about that. And as I say, this is a famous, long-winded gambit that the top players have played for years. And I still think it looks to me like black's theoretically still okay in these positions, but you have to study them. They're very concrete. Okay, so that's aside because that's not what happened in this game. What happened in this game was that you took right away, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually good. It's a little, it's sort of committal. And it's called the open Catalan, like I say. And white developed. Now, actually, I think there's some interesting things happening here recently, just recently, where black, instead of playing either c5, which is the normal counterattacking idea, or even knight c6, actually sort of prepares knight c6, plays this move, which is meant to discourage this, check. And it's possible also that black will simply defend with b5 if white isn't careful and just hang on to his extra pawn. And one of the points here is that if white plays castles, black can play this move knight c6 now. And this is done pretty well for black recently. It just covers key squares and prevents this move knight e5 because you have knight takes d4. So you're still a pawn up. So white has to get his pawn back. And while white's getting his pawn back, you can just develop. And very top players have done quite well with this recently. So let's go back and see the actual game. Okay, so black counterattack. What great instincts you have. First time you played against Catalan where you just immediately attack back in the center. I think it's a good system. Still fine, makes a lot of sense. You go ahead and you attack again. He pins you, you unpin. Well, actually, you didn't unpin. You can just simply unpin this now. That's probably the system you want to play next time if you're going to play this line again. And here's why, because you don't have to worry about your pawns getting shattered. Let's just show what happened in the game first, actually. Let me just show you. you had this problem that in this position you ended up with these doubled pawns and weak pawns. That's a little weak too. Now black can play this position, but you weren't comfortable and it didn't work out very well. So one way to avoid that is simply to play this move now. It's a well-known line actually. And then when white takes, and this is Wesley So was white recently in a game with this. Actually, all the grandmasters have played this at one time or another, it seems like. But black's clever little idea is this. And then white for years went here, always, and allowed black to play there. And it's a complicated game, but I think black's considered okay here. You might want to study this, though. Here's a good case. You have no special weaknesses. It's an interesting position. So Wesley played this move, and I wish I could tell you exactly how it went. Looks like that loses more time, but actually was a little cleverer. I don't think white has a forced advantage here, though. I think something like this happened. Notice that threatens knight takes e2 check, so you don't have time to take the rook. And then rook c8, maybe? I'm thinking probably rook c8, and that gives him bishop c5. And you could play this line. This is a good open pieces. So won the game, but after all, he is Wesley So, and also it wasn't necessarily much to do with the opening. I don't think it was. I think black's just fine here. Maybe bishop f4 isn't even the best move, but anyway, so yeah, so this is a way to play the line you played, but play it more solidly. Now, what does he have besides queen takes? I don't think that much. He can take here. You just take back, and then he can take here. But then you can simply I don't know, do you retreat this? I think that's a solid move, a good solid move. Your pieces are pretty active. You're just going to castle. You know, I don't know if white has an infinitesimal advantage there or not, but it's certainly playable on almost any level and has been played before. So that's the main move, and then you just take everything off and play rook c8. So that'd be my recommendation. Okay, that's opening. Now, what about the game itself? The game itself got pretty fascinating. Yeah, in this position, really, I guess I agree that you're already for sure worse here. Because the pawns are just too weak on the queen side. But however, white didn't really exploit that properly. Let me show you. This is a very good move here. The queen's pretty well placed there. So this knight's going to come up here. Black really doesn't want to play that way because it just opens up the bishop and makes this and blocks off your own bishop too. So all white has to do is make a move, and now this knight is a beautiful outpost in front of an isolated pawn on an open file. And white hasn't even had to give up the two bishops to get this position. So you definitely don't want to repeat this line. The more that I think about this, there's just no, yeah, this is just good for white. White can even get some advantage just taking this, I think. Not much, but a little bit. But I really like knight d2. I think that's a very strong move. Another good move is just rook d1, pinning this. And then maybe knight d2 or knight a3 or some move like that. So you were lucky in a way that he played this way because black was able to get his pieces out and get a pretty decent game. Yeah, this isn't bad at all. Now that knight should be pressuring the queenside pawns, so this is definitely not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is put that knight on c4 on an outpost square, like go there, and then play either knight b3, c5, or much more likely just knight c4. And white's just better here. Now he's not a lot better like he was in the other position. He's just somewhat better. But white doesn't understand the position. White plays knight f3, and the knight doesn't really belong on f3, although obviously white can't stand badly with this pawn structure. Good move. Black, although a little committal maybe. Black moves into the center. He does allow himself to be attacked, but after all that blocks off the bishop, so it's not that bad a move. Gain a little tempo on the queen. I like that move because white had a positional idea of playing here, opening up his bishop again. So that's kind of cool that you played this f6 move. I think that's kind of an interesting move. And white played here. And then white tried to blockade that square, probably a good idea. But black got that move in, freeing that bishop finally to do good things. So black's definitely in the game here. White played here, black captured. Okay, so it looks all pretty good for white at first sight because he's got an outpost in front of an isolated pawn on an open file. But black's fairly active, and this bishop is starting to look kind of crummy, isn't it? This bishop can't go there, and it's blocked off by its own pawn, and the knight's a little bit away from the play too. And black has the b file to play around with. He has pretty active pieces, so really black's almost okay here. Maybe white's still better, but it's no big deal. Good move, rook b8, get on an open file, looks good to me. White wanted to stop this move. On the other hand, that's kind of slow. black gets rook on open file. That's a nice move. Just take over the outpost and double. So white's better here, and but not overwhelmingly better. And then things went downhill. And I don't know if you even want to necessarily see how things went downhill. At the end, I think white just blundered. This is just a little bit better for white, this position. And I don't think I'll go any further than that. Later on, black kind of fell apart tactically a little bit. But I'd say basically you reacted very well, but getting those pawns, you were right, ended up just being too difficult a task. It's not as though you played the position badly. It's that objectively, once that pawn is on c6, it just turned out that if white plays well, you've got quite a disadvantage. So hopefully you'll take up one of the other suggestions I made there. What's going on here in my favorite show? Aha. Okay, so I've been asked about the Maroczy bind. Let me see. What do you think about knight g4 or the double fianchetto systems? I think they're both still better for white. I noticed that black played a nice double fianchetto system the other day and actually won against a very strong player, but I don't think it was just because white didn't really know the opening. The good thing about knight g4 is too well known. He's talking about this stuff. He's talking about this variation. Knight g4, I think the only problem with knight g4 is it's so darn well known that people, let me see, how does I, like, do I know it? No, but other people know it. The idea of knight g4 is that it's this move, which looks really crazy because the knight's hanging, right? But white does have to react because you're threatening knight takes e3, getting rid of the dragon, the anti-dragon bishop. So that once you get rid of that bishop, you stand much better. So white has to do something. If white takes this, then it looks like he's just winning material, but black can take this, attacking this queen. He could even take here and protect that knight too, and probably wouldn't be the end of the world, but I've never seen it. But knight takes e3 is so strong that he never does that. And then after that you take, and after he takes here, you take, and you have the bishop pair, and you can win endings with bishop pairs. So black's already better here. Black has no weaknesses. White's remaining bishop is kind of a bad bishop. Just to show everybody what knight g4 is about. I know you know that. The person asking the question knows that. Okay, so what are the problems with knight g4? Well, queen takes looks like it could be something, but then of course there's knight takes d4. You get your piece back. And then the most famous move now is simply here. Now people have played a lot of funny moves. Knight c2 check is threatened. People played a lot of funny moves where they try to put their queen over here or here. And I don't know how those stand. I think black's always been supposed to be sort of okay in those positions. So the main move is this, and then the most famous move for black is to play this. Just try to hold on in the center. There's also this old move, and there's a famous Petrosian-Larsen game that white won in this line. I think everybody just admits here that white has a slight space advantage and a slight advantage here. Black can play this way, but you know, this is a real bind now. And the idea is that I think you play rook c1 first. I'm not sure. You could play queen d2, just so you don't have knight bishop takes check. You're trying to avoid bishop takes, doubling the pawns. So this line I think is still theoretically better, and I think e5 is the one you'll see in all the books. And what you might want to do is take a look at some of the repertoire books, especially for white, because they all show their favorite line against this. I think usually just bishop d3. And this has been around. This one's been around for 100 years, and there have been countless games with it. And I wish I could tell you. I don't know the answer to your actual question because I don't know the exact theoretical standing, but I do. I'm almost sure white's still considered better here. It's not much. I mean, you can play this line. You can play this way. And I don't know if I missed anything there. It could be there's also some other line I'm not thinking about here. Is there another way to play this is the question. I don't think so. Yeah, white just has a little bit of it has a space advantage here. So either knight e6 or e5 are the only really logical ways to play this. Okay, so now what else happens here? What are we talking about here? Oh, the fianchetto systems. Okay, so the fianchetto systems go with like here, here, and then b6, either now or next move. I think usually just next move, right? Is that right? Or do you play right away? Yeah, usually castle first, and if they play here, then you play b6. I used to love these for black because you got that idea in the long run of playing this and then at some point making this beautiful f5 break and try to checkmate white, who's sitting over there on the queen side. This was always a position I wanted to play for black. And there are all kinds of clever ways to build up, you know, knight here followed by knight here followed by f5, and it's just, it can be kind of a fun looking system. The reality, though, I think, is if white knows what he's doing, he just has the better game. And I haven't seen anything to contradict that recently. Although, as I say, I did see a top grandmaster level grandmaster game recently. You might want to look for it. Just look at, download games from this year and see, cut it off by rating, and then look for the ECO codes and see what white did wrong or what black did right. Um, I just think white has more space, and if he's careful, he doesn't get mated or he doesn't allow a good f5. So overall, I would say, the idea is that at some point, I'm going to mess this up, but one of the old moves was just to play here and cut off the bishop. And there's kind of a point to that, isn't there? That this bishop would be very nice in that square, except that it is kind of running into a wall with f3 and e4, and you have to break down that wall. You have to either get f5 in or somehow get b5 in later, or somehow just play enough piece play that you exchange enough pieces that you're not worried about that ending. Um, I think I think the theory has always been plus equals for white, but black can play it. Don't be scared of playing something just because white's supposed to be slightly better. Okay, we have no chat going on here, folks. Chat. Try not to miss anything here. So we've gone on for quite a long time now. I could throw. Okay, I think that's it. That's enough for now. We got through at least 2 games. We'll get through more games. I've got 2 specific opening questions that people sent me that I will address next week. And is there anything else right now? Just remember to email me your questions or message me on ICC. That way you've got plenty of chance to put a question together. You can send me a game, you can send me analysis, or you can simply ask very specifically, what do I think about this or that opening or position or strategy, and have a well thought out question. And the way to do that is send an email to askimwatson@chessclub.com. So that's ASKIMWATSON at CHESSCLUB.com. Ask IamWatson@chessclub.com. Please send me things. This week it was funny. I actually got a couple opening questions, but I didn't get any more. I didn't get enough that we're starting to catch up. So that's the good sign. So if you ask something now, there's a good chance you'll get a response within a couple of weeks, either next week or the week afterwards. Okay. Oh, here's a question. Looks like. Oh no, sorry. I got that mixed up. So thank you everybody, and we will meet again next week. And tell your friends, get people to listen, get people to send in questions, or if you feel like it's too much effort to send an email, you can always kind of prepare, think about what you're going to ask on the chat beforehand, and and just throw something in there on the chat. Thanks very much, everybody, and I'll see you next week.